the brilliant presentation by Mr. George Sapong, who is the Executive Secretary of the National Media Commission. He will take his seat. Let's put our hands together for him. Also joining us for this conversation is Paul Adum Ochri. He's a former board member of the National Communications Authority and a celebrated broadcaster as well. Yes. And finally, we'll have Mr. George Chumesi, CEO of ABN Holdings and co-founder of the Africa Public Interest Media Initiative. Let's put our hands together for him. Gentlemen, you're welcome. So what I'll do is I'll take brief reactions from the other two gentlemen, Paul and fellow George, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. Hello. I think it's working. Good morning. Thank you very much. I'd like to acknowledge, as everyone else has done, President John Ajekum Kufuor and also Minister for Communication, the Honorable Sam Nate George. Happy to see you and thank you. I'd like to speak from just one perspective as a content creator for news and current affairs. And I've had this burden relating to this topic for a while. I believe dating back to since 2014. And my sensibilities in this area was aroused one weekend when there was news all over that the Black Stars participating in the World Cup had flown money abroad to pay for the players. And at that time, I had been doing a lot of work with Mr. Chumesi here on this subject. And the issue about digital migration was a big conversation. I got excited about digital migration because it is a way in which there's a way to do it in which content, local content especially, can be monetized by the infrastructure that government creates. And so I'd been focusing on the NCA since around 2014, and I'm sure I've had conversations with George on in that same regard. When that Black Stars situation occurred, I was concerned about the digital migration. At that time, Ghana was doing a digital migration where, if I may just go back and explain what digital migration is, just so that we're on the same page. You know, we watch television in our homes. We've been doing that from time immemorial. And the television we watch in our homes is free. We don't pay for it. GBC has been talking about TV license and all that. It doesn't quite work because then the argument came with the democracy that, what if I don't watch GBC? Why must I pay? There was a counter argument that, well, GBC is a public service broadcaster, so whether you watch it or not, it has a public service side to it. It is rendering a public service that you may benefit one way or the other. Somebody connected to you will benefit one way or the other when announcements are made, etc. So every Ghanaian must pay for TV license. But the critical matter is that the product, say the English Premier League, the football product called English Premier League, is wealthy. Why is it wealthy? It's wealthy because every weekend, and this weekend we're going to do the same, every weekend when you and I watch the English Premier League, we are paying for it. And 7 billion people around the world are paying for it. So if each of us is paying $1 and there are 7 billion of us, that's a bulk of the money that the English Premier League makes. It is their rights. The monetization of the content. They have been able to monetize the content. We have been watching Black Stars games in Ghana forever for free. If we could watch a Black Star game for 5 cedis and we have to pay from our phone, and 10 million people watch the Black Stars game and each of us pays 5 cedis to watch the Black Stars game, that's the amount of money that goes to the Football Association. That doesn't require them then to go to government and ask for money for Black Stars. But the mechanism to do that is not available. So we are in Ghana, there's no mechanism to pay to watch Asante Kotoko and Accra Hearts of Oak. But the Englishman has found a mechanism to take our $1 for us to watch his Premier League all the way in England. When we watch Manchester United, we pay. When we watch Asante Kotoko, we don't pay. Because the government has not developed the infrastructure so that you can pay to watch Asante Kotoko. That's the critical conversation that we must have. It is the commercialization of content. It will enable economics. It will enable development. It will enable employment. Why we have not achieved this all these years, I don't understand. How do we achieve it? Government had been looking at this for a while and had proposed different conversations. When I was on the NCA, the conclusion was that we are going to migrate to a single platform. So we are migrating from whatever we have now to a small decoder. That decoder has channels. All the channels that you are watching will be on the decoder. But the important issue was for the government policy to introduce another platform on the same decoder where you will now pay to watch those channels. So you watch TV3 free, you watch Metro TV free, you watch GBC free, you watch ChannelOne free. All of that is one part of the decoder. The next part of the decoder is where you watch ChannelOne Plus, where ChannelOne have submitted programs to the authority, say the NCA, that these programs, we want people to pay to watch it. So if you are watching ChannelOne on a normal day, they'll finish with morning show and say, for those of you who are watching on ChannelOne, your next program is that. For those of you watching on ChannelOne Plus, your next program is that. ChannelOne Plus migrates the best ChannelOne programs. TV3 Plus migrates the best TV3 programs. So you have that second platform. And so you are paying to watch those programs. So money is generated from that platform for all of these stations. So if you take a TV station, they will have some programs free and they'll have some programs that you pay for. Then they can have an extra channel for all the people who create content. If today the big story is, say, any politician, there's a big story today and something has happened around an individual, and so we want to interview the person, we can go and take that channel from NCA and say, give me this channel for 3 hours. I have this interview. I believe people will pay 10 cedis to watch. And then there's an arrangement. Ghana Music Awards is going on. They will have to do a quality production, put it on an NCA channel and say, you watch it for 2 cedis. By the time we finish, that's the money we have. If the GFA is broke, you organize a friendly between the Ghana Black Stars and the Super Eagles at the Accra Sports Stadium. But it's 10 cedis to watch on television because the infrastructure is available. If 12 million Ghanaians pay 10 cedis to watch that game, and some of the money goes to the stadium, some of the money goes to the away team, some of the money goes to the NCA, some of the money goes to the GRA, the Football Association will still have enough to run the show. We are talking about local football and every day we're having conversations. Until we monetize content of local football on local television, we are not going anywhere. You can never raise that amount of money. But if Haas and Kotoko play and the digital revenue is 100 million cedis, it is only then that you are beginning to have a conversation. Why government has not achieved this one, I don't understand.
Yes, Paul, thank you. You're making a strong point about commercialization. I just want to get brief remarks from our second judge on the panel as well.
Hello. Hi. I'd like to set the stage with context, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank His Excellency John Ejekumko, who is my mentor. The context of this discussion is very important because I think it's a nexus for what the industry does next with specificity to the reality of the role of the digital migration we are currently experiencing. The first point I want to make is that some years back, there was this talk of DTT and MAST, etc. Right now, it's a mute conversation. It's part of the plethora of the digital ecosystem that exists in the world, number one. Number two, it's about markets, because it's capital intensive, this industry. So my perspective, I went to NAFTI in 1983, went to Prempeh College, then NAFTI straight there, those days. I was teaming with a lot of ideas, Anansi stories, animation, Yasantua Wars, Queen Amina of Zaria. Why can't we tell our stories? Why do I have to basically watch English soaps? I was brought up with a lot of fairy tales, the Marquis of Caraba and Tintin and all of that when I was growing up. So I wanted to tell the African story. Left the country on a wild adventure. And then during my adventure, I came across a quote by the founding president of Ghana. I quote, "We shall leverage radio, television, and large-scale printing presses to eradicate literacy among our people." A decade ago, such statements would have been deemed visionary, mere fantasies of an idle dreamer. However, this is an era in which science has surpassed the boundaries of the material world, and technology has penetrated the natural world. That was in 1963, May at the OAU. It wasn't until August 2019 when I heard another African leader talk, and that was President Kufuor at Claridge's Hotel. That's why I approached him with the idea that public interest media is something which has to transform Africa. Otherwise, we are going nowhere. The issue is policy right now and regulation, right? My view is that there's an academic side to policy and there's a practical side to policy. And I'll just quickly touch on the three without expanding. The first is that we need an Africa Media Development Fund, not a Ghana-focused fund. The second is that we need a think tank that does R&D because the world has changed. Broadcasting has been replaced by narrowcasting. And this is just the beginning. It's Facebook and TikTok, etc. It's just like when cinema started in the 20s and people would go and watch horses eat hay. That was when Gone with the Wind happened, and then after that, science fiction was born with George Lucas, and we are where we are today. Where we are with digital technology is just the beginning, and we need to own our own ecosystem as Africans. So I think Ghana is well placed because of the Criminal Libel Acts, because of, I would say specifically, the significant think tank process which President Kufuor has initiated this past 6 years. He's done a lot of work as a political leader, and I think it will be opportune for the country to look at creating a digital hub here, whatever the regulatory environment is, right, to make Ghana the hub for developing a new ecosystem for Africa.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are some brilliant submissions. Let's put our hands together for them. Yes, and please be reminded that this is broadcasting at the Crossroads Forum. It is brought to you by Africa Media Bureau in partnership with the Ministry of Communication, Digital Technology and Innovation, and is sponsored by KNET WAPS and also supported by ChannelOne TV and City FM. Thank you for the brief remarks on the presentation. I'd like to draw back to you, Mr. Sapong. I don't even want to call it a presentation, the lecture, the very detailed lecture you gave, albeit that you held on to some portions. It appears that for this policy and regulatory gap that we find ourselves in, you put out 3 options. And I think these 3 options are quite scary. You talk about maintaining the non-converged NMC, NCA regulation that we have as option 1. You talk about, picking up from the UK Ofcom approach, having a merger, a convergence of the NMC, NCA. That would require constitutional amendment. And from your presentation, that's not an option that you are keen on choosing. And then you talk about maintaining the chaos and approaching it from the broadcasting law. I'm going to have the other panel members speak to it, but I want you to settle on your best option. You hinted at option 1 being the best option. I see a frown on your face. That means you disagree. Perfect. So let's see what's the best option in terms of closing this regulatory gap.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The reason why I really am almost indifferent, except that as for the broadcasting law approach, as an expert in the field, I honestly do not see how I explain that to myself or to anybody else. But that's a public process, so that's about it. It doesn't make sense. And I will say it very directly. It doesn't make sense. It's going to complicate the work of NCA and NMC even further. The Director General of NCA is here. If he thinks otherwise, you can ask them. And
an amendment cannot cure that.
First of all, it's too complicated. Okay, it is like splitting half a woman and half a man and joining them as one human. Okay, it just doesn't make sense. Let's face it. However, as I've said, it's a public process, a political process. I only state my opinion and leave it. That's what it is. The reason why the first option is easier, and it is not because it's my preference. It is easier because by policy, we have already opted for a non-converged regulatory system. So that defines the rest of our path. We've decided that we are going to Kumasi. So we know the pathways that lead us to Kumasi. We know that we can go through Nsawam, or we may go through Kasua and still end up somewhere there. We may use the third exit out of Accra through the Volta region. We know how efficient each one of them is.
But there are also
we
challenges.
know that we can't use the sea.
George, there are also challenges with this non-converged approach.
Precisely. Whichever option we take, there's going to be work to be done. But which one makes conceptual sense and create regulatory efficiency? It is easier, far cheaper to adopt option 1 because it sits with the existing policy framework. Option 2 would require too much re-engineering. You already know how complicated constitutional processes are. And I have also, outside the constitutional process, the one thing that in all sincerity, I work for NMC, but anytime I hear people say, take the broadcasting spectrum and give to NMC, I panic. Because no forward-looking nation will do that today, even though it appears that it will help NMC. Who wouldn't want power? You are allocating frequency, and I'm saying it may enhance our power as NMC, me myself, but it just doesn't make sense as a patriot who understands the industry. It just doesn't work. We shouldn't go near that. As for the broadcasting law, I've explained to you how I see it and how others see it.
It's a no-go for you. Paul, I want to bring you in this conversation. I'd like to take your take on which option you believe works, especially because you have had the opportunity to sit on two sides as a regulator and also as a broadcaster. Speak to that for me.
What are the options?
So option 1 from his presentation is that we maintain the non-convergence regulation that we have. Option 2 is to
add that. So, and then we address the policy gaps. Okay. So if we think that it is the NMC side that is weak, let's amend the NMC side to strengthen it to do their work. If we find any gaps in the technical regulation, let's amend the NCA Act to improve that. Simple, straightforward.
So that's option 1, the non-convergence with the policy gaps being addressed. Option 2 looks at what is similar in the UK, the converged regulation, and that will require a constitutional amendment. I'd wanted to speak to you that isn't the time opportune because there's a review underway. But back to you, Paul. And option 3 will be to maintain the current system and pursue the broadcast law.
I think the divergence, for me as a student of political science, the divergence grants a bit of checks and balances. And so that's very necessary. So one controls the content and the other controls the technical. It's also important, the way we do it in Ghana, that it appears that the National Media Commission is not as much under the thumb of government as the NCA could be. And that's also very important. If you look at the constitution of the Media Commission, about 23 or so people, few of them are selected by government. Ultimately, government may control. A government that wants to behave like an octopus to grab territory would be able to control it. But it is, at least on paper, it gives an opportunity for a great semblance of a certain independence of the National Media Commission connected to the NCA. So that works. But that's what we are doing now. So NCA then goes into cancel somebody's license based on the content that they may have published. National Media Commission must be the platform to determine whether the content is good or is bad. I remember the arguments about the broadcasting law. I'm not sure how we're going to create a convergence in the current ecosystem that we have. It's going to be very difficult. So we perhaps must enhance the independence of the National Media Commission to the extent that the National Communication Authority has something to do with national security. I think we should leave that for government, firmly for government, because they have other roles that should not lend itself to influence from other quarters who do not control governmental authority. for that reason, we should afford the National Media Commission a bit more independence if we can in some of the amendments, and allow other interest groups. I don't know whether the National Union of Ghana Students are represented on NMC. Are they? Yeah, so something like that. We should be expanding it in those regards. So I think that the divergence is better than convergence.
Okay, Mr. Chumisi, I'll take your quick remarks on that.
I'd like to talk from a global perspective. There's something called the FANG: Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google.
Facebook, Apple,
Amazon, Netflix, and Google.
Netflix and Google.
Yeah,
fine.
they are all technology companies. They have more money than any other media company right now in terms of content. Facebook, reluctantly, you've got kids who control, who become editors right now. In 5 years from now, in Ghana, we'll have automated journalism. It's going to be AI-driven. So the reality is that digital technology has changed the world. It doesn't matter what the options are. There's another reality, right? The reality is that this industry, media, does not make any money based on infrastructure. It's IP-driven, it's content. And there's so much work to do in terms of content formulation and content appropriation and content monetization that the argument about any option is a mute one right now. I would take it further. There are two brilliant individuals. I know both personally. The Director General of NCA and the head of the National Media Commission,
NMC,
right?
yes.
I think the hard options that need to be considered are not part of the options he's defined. And the hard option is that one has to determine whether technology is going to usurp the role of content, or if content will remain autonomous of technology. And I think in this time, look at our industry, it's 2025, but think about it in terms of 1925, right? So 100 years from now, the policy framing that the minds, not the organizations, but the intellectual capital of these two individuals put together is what would determine the future of the industry.
Okay, very well said. I want to tackle again an issue that came up when Paul was responding about the independence of the NMC. I understand his point, at least on paper, he says that there appears to be independence. But that has been one of the biggest concerns that was raised or has been raised in the past about the independence of the NMC. The Director General and other directors are appointed, NCA, are appointed by the President. That being the case, how do we separate political influence from an independent authority regulator, especially with the concerns about the plurality of media organizations?
When we think of policy, one of the dangers that we should avoid is to create in our mind policy angels and policy demons. The concern about the legitimate fears of government within the governance architecture of Africa is true. However, we should be cautious not always to think that government involvement is bad. And that is the point that Paul just made, that there are certain significant functions that the NCA perform, not precisely because you have an elected government that has a mandate to lead. Certain kinds of policy should be in the hands of government. So I do not have difficulty with the NCA staying as a government agency. And I say this as a personal view, I have known the NCA up close. I do not share a lot of the things that I hear outside about the institution. And I think Paul hinted at the same reason. The NCA sometimes is not what people say, and I wish that people would get closer to the institution. I'm on record to have said publicly that I think in this country it is the best managed public institution. I've said this publicly. So, in short, let us not fear too much the structure and architecture that we've created. But you hint at another problem. When I talk about the need for constitutional amendment if we're taking the converge route, I also added that it would involve undermining the unity of command in the management of spectrum. And one of the key reasons there is that the nation, you see the spectral resource, it doesn't have the physical boundary as we have. It's not the place that can put customs and the immigration and police people in the air. You can't. So there are international protocols that manage these issues. And it is government-to-government relationship. And within the country, it is the regulator, in our case the NCA, that leads those international discussions and negotiations. So you necessarily will have to keep NCA the way it is. However, if anybody has doubt about the relationship between government or the ministry and the regulator, all that we need to do will be to develop protocols for the relationship between the ministry and the NCA, and if possible, even set it out in legislation. But otherwise, I will keep NCA the way it is to be able to lead government effort in the technology industry. I will keep NMC with the point that my brothers have both said, the diverse composition of the commission, which helps to hold its stability as an independent institution, and let each one of them do their work very well whilst constructing a framework for cooperation amongst them. Thank you.
Paul, you still hold that view despite the fact that management of frequencies can be used as a political weapon?
Well, yes, we can look at that, and we are still evolving as a democracy. Some of these things are bound to happen. We just have to think through and push regulations in. Some of the areas we could exploit, for instance, is that there are no courts, and we do have a vibrant judiciary. There are no courts set aside to hear communication-related cases. If they are there, if they are, then I don't know yet. Oh, yeah, we have that tribunal, but it kind of works under NCA in a certain way that I know it's independent, but this jurisdiction and mandate seems quite limited. You know, if we have a regular high court that can regulate these things. The other thing we can do is that when the NCA makes a decision that a radio station or TV station has fallen foul in a way that they have to terminate their license, we can introduce another level where they have to submit that to the Parliamentary Committee on Communication, for instance, to submit to Parliament that these are the categories of radio stations that we are going to terminate, and then Parliament can hold a hearing. We can improve on these things, but like George said, let us trust government. We have adopted a democracy. It has been working for 35 years. We get too suspicious of government. It's the same suspicion that led us to ignore GBC in leading this whole digital migration. It would have been done by now. But there was such strong suspicion from the GIBA and all these people about they don't want GBC, because as if GBC will belong to one person forever. People will be changing at GBC. It was very disappointing. I remember Ampim Dakun was very disappointed about that. That what is the suspicion of GBC so that we don't want... In England, BBC had a big role to play in it. So let us trust our state institutions. It's only then that we can establish, the other day, recently, Esla Usu was a minister for communication. Esla Usu and Sam George have had their own fight. Sam George has come to be minister. And I can assure you that he's continuing some of the things that Esla did. Another person will become minister after Sam George. He will fight with him, but he will continue. By the time we've done that for 70 years, we are getting somewhere. And I'm sure President Kufuor likes the things I'm saying, because he was part of the group that said we should hold on to this democracy and try it. We will get there, and we should trust the process. Thank you, Mr. President. So let's trust the process. We can do it.
Very well. And Minister George made a point about government coming in to regulate and not censor. Mr. Chumesi, I'd like to take your view on what is your expectation with this kind of intervention. Paul is saying let's trust the government. Mr. Sapon is saying similar. What's your expectation? What's your expectation in terms of drawing the line between regulation and censorship?
I like this well-worn-out expression, data is the new gold. right? I think in 2020, Google and IFC came out with a report, e-economy report, which has made the assumption that by the end of 2025, it's in the ether, but the digital space would generate 180 billion USD in terms of potential revenue. That's not been appropriated by anybody because the ecosystem doesn't exist. They also said conservatively that by 2050, it'll be 720 million, 20 billion, right? So let's assume that Ghana wants to create $1 trillion economy. Let's make the assumption that Ghana is going to go for gold, that data gold. We're going to become Africa's premier hub for our content and for the appropriation of effective technology. And I might add, a company like KNet and what they're doing, they could become the SCS of Africa. We are tired of Eutelsat and SCS and Intelsat and all these. They're all parts of the colonial administrative system. And when you look at what's happening in the stratosphere in terms of balloons and drones, etc., Africa needs its own integral dynamic. So against that background, why don't we look at a strong National Media Commission that is strong in Ghana, but also leads the intellectual knowledge capital process across Africa? A strong NCA that leads in Ghana, but also leads across Africa, and then have an oversight body with government legislation. This oversight body is going to be autonomous of government, like the same kind of rule that NMC currently enjoys. And then NMC focuses on content. We build GBC into a behemoth, a digital behemoth, right? And go NCA looking at what these things are going to be doing, mobile handsets, right? And then look at creating an economy where Ghana not only depends on cocoa and gold, but $1 trillion digital economy. If we think that way, our paradigm will change.
Mr. Sapon, is that foreseeable in the nearest future?
Nothing is unforeseeable once we commit ourselves to it. Just yesterday, I was having a discussion with somebody who had questions about the decline in democracy around the world. And I was telling the person, this democracy that we are mourning its almost demise was constructed by human beings like us. Maybe even within an age where they didn't have all the information that we have. So if it falls on us to reimagine how the next 100 years is going to look like in terms of how society is structured, we should grab that. Your Excellency, please forgive me for this one. Old conversations, sometimes you bring them back. When I was a student leader and we were angry at the Rawlings administration and we were mobilizing and organizing, there was a day His Excellency told us that looking at us, he wanted democratic Ghana to benefit all of us. He didn't want any one of us to go and die when we didn't need it. So when we think about methods, we should think about methods that are sustainable, that also protect everybody. I have not had the chance to remind His Excellency some of the things that he said at the time that we completely disagreed with. We completely disagreed with him with. But as we grew up and today, we can then see that he was seeing farther than we could see. It seems to me that is the way we should think about society, how to structure it and its growth. So I say nothing is unforeseeable, and I completely agree with John. Thank you.
Thank you. I would now like to turn our attention to one other big issue that you raised in your presentation about the digital migration and the questions that came up. For instance, the definition of a broadcaster. We looked at the provisions that are afforded by Article 162, 163, and the limitations you talked about. And also the matter of commercial viability and standards in terms of our context as Ghana. How do we maneuver around all of these things?
It's a very simple approach. If I would be listened to, I would say, let's calm down. Let us start with RIA, Regulatory Impact Assessment and Analysis. let us pull together all the issues that are of concern to us, and let's sit together and frame a pathway. In doing that, the only caution that I want to give is that previously we have constructed public consultations by legitimacy rather than competence. So there are institutions that we think are implicated. They are the ones that we bring to the table. Our panel discussions here have showed you that there are so many brilliant minds who may not fit into the mold of the previous approaches to consultation. So if we are going to do consultation now, we should construct them in a way that enables all our big brains with the necessary competences to feed into the process. The past method of NMC2, GIBA 1, this you understand, is not going to help us. If you did that, a lot of our colleagues who've spoken today and said so much with us won't be in the room. In short, let us calmly start with the regulatory impact assessment and analysis. Let's bring to the table all the people that we can identify as having the competences to help us. Together we can chart the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chumesi, listening to him, do you see the way forward clear ahead? And going back to the challenges he talked about with respect to the digital migration, how much of that will hamper, our desire to have a Ghana hub, an Africa hub in terms of technology and media generally?
I'll be very specific, and I'll like to name call. I've had the opportunity to work across Africa for close to 35 years in search of an African identity, who we are, why racism exists, and the greater storyline of someone like Joseph Conrad and the Heart of Darkness. I don't buy into that. So my search for identity, right, has led me to understand the continent to the extent that the industry of media and entertainment does count in terms of charting the future. Against that background, when I look at the concept of an African Media Bureau, right, it's very, very powerful. And knowing the work that Samens and Ben Avle stand for, right, that could be the nexus of change for Africa. In many ways, that's number one. When I look at someone like Theo Asampong, who's a brilliant technology mind by any standard in the world, convergence is something that has to stay and happen in Africa, right, led by Ghana. When Mr. Fianco, Reverend Fianco, we've met many, many times in Tanzania, South Africa, you name it. And when he gives presentations, people stand up and listen, but it's just presentation. So when he became the DG of NCA, I thought it was a huge opportunity. Professor Amin Alassane, you are not going to get another Director General of GBC. You won't get another Director General of GBC in our time who understands development communications, public interest media like he does. George Sapong, right? When it comes to media law, there are very few. But above all, President Kufuor, you should see him working on media. It's stunning. Everybody in his household sees him. When we sit for 5 hours, 4 hours, he won't stop. And he pushes you to the limits of your human capacity. I think we have what it takes as Ghanaians. What we need is gentle persuasion, and everybody who listened to our president speak yesterday at the United Nations, right, and making reference to 25% of the world being African by 2050. And there's an article in New York Times, which I think everybody should read. It's called Old World, Young Africa. We are dominating the world, even if we do not believe it ourselves. And I think Ghana is not an accident of nature. If we get our media and telecoms infrastructure right, if we get GBC right, Africa will change.
All right. Broadcasting at the crossroads. Gentlemen, what I get from you is that the future looks bright. I'd like us to, give our concluding remarks. Okay. His Excellency has a quick contribution. Yes, please.
Listening to George and the panelists, I get the impression we are over-concerned about the current situation. George, in the presentation, alluded to what is happening in Germany and Europe, and I got the feeling that would be the way you'd want media or broadcasting development to go. The difficulties you point at are real now, but with a think tank, and we've got the personnel, we've got the brains to do it, I believe we could span the development into realizing what you show. And it might be within, say, perhaps a decade, we'll get there. In the sense that currently, it might be good to work with the split between NCA and the Media Commission, your commission, currently. But if we should think about how to move to, if you like, the integration of whatever it is, we might come, you talk of the Constitution. Constitution could be amended. Only you should start the process. And I know that currently everybody says the president has too much power, I would say appointments and everything. And that's where the fear of undue political influences come in. I have been telling people, if, say, we would, as a nation, move with constitutional amendment, and I believe in the executive presidency, all right, but I would say on the principle of checks and balances, I might consider, instead of, say, a council of state, a second chamber, which would be composed on institutions. And that's where, in terms of appointments to bodies that should be independent, like with the media, you want independent editorship and so forth and so on. Anything to do with, say, state broadcasting, in terms of appointments there, it shouldn't be just the president say so. There should be a body, say, within the legislature, second chamber, doing the vetting for people who would be recommended. So when they get their position and they are meant to be independent, they would really work as independents. And unless we start thinking of this and also moving to influence the processes of, say, the Constitutional Review Committee, to allow Ghana to see between the lines and influence the processes, unless we do that, we might become like the proverbial worm that never cut ice. So we need to start thinking, and if you believe the German practice is what Ghana should have, please, yes, even as in the short term, you say let the two institutions counter-check each other. Let's think of how we get to the German experience you are recommending, and that might be medium to long term. And that might also entail constitutional reform, and when you are reforming constitution, look at the institutions there. Would we be served better with a second chamber where the composition is not, say, on the say-so of the president exclusively, but say on the composition of acknowledged, recognized institutions that would take over from, say, the parliamentary vetting committee, which tends to be lopsided sometimes. You go, some here would be there on appointments committee, and anybody coming from the party with all the defaults might just pass through. No, we push the appointments to that second house of independent institutions to see whether the nominee really is befitting of consideration to become what you want to become. So please think of the now and then medium to long term. When you do that, propose, and then you might see that the convergence might come and we might still retain the checks and balances Paul is talking about. Thank you.
Let's put our hands together. Thank you very much for those wise words. And I think we will conclude on the wise words shared by His Excellency, unless my guests have any comment. We're out of time.
Just a quick comment. Back to the commercialization of content. Right now in Ghana, 90% of television and radio stations are running at a loss because the advertising is not working anymore. The only way to redeem this situation is to have a way in which content can be monetized, and so people can get money from content. Radio stations and TV stations are opening YouTube channels and putting their content on because that's how they get money. It's important that this conversation about monetizing local content through the NCA infrastructure is taken very seriously. Otherwise, a lot of these stations are grounding to a halt, and the danger is that they will be overtaken by politicians and politics. And then all of what we are seeing on our media landscape in terms of what President Mahama has been complaining about, abuse and the use of rogue language and all of that, is because people want to attract, and they want to attract likes, and that's social media, and that's how they get paid. If they can also get paid by the regular way of broadcasting and monetizing their content, it will help a great deal. So I think that it should be a conversation that should be taken very seriously.
Okay. I think we're out of time, so we'll leave it here. But please be reminded that this is Broadcasting at the Crossroads Forum is brought to you by Africa Media Bureau in partnership with the Ministry of Communication, Digital Technology and Innovation, sponsored by KNET, WAPS, and supported by ChannelOne TV and City 97.3 FM. Ladies and gentlemen, help me say a big thank you to our panel members. George Sapong is the Executive Secretary of the National Media Commission. Paul Adomotre is former board member of the NCA and a seasoned broadcaster. George Trumesi is CEO of ABN Holdings and co-founder of the Africa Public Interest Media Initiative. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you as well.